There's a heaviness that settles in sometimes, isn't there? It arrives without invitation, usually in those tender hours when the world grows quiet and you're left alone with your thoughts. Maybe it's the weight of decisions unmade, the echo of words unsaid, or simply the overwhelming sense that life is moving too fast while you feel like you're standing still. This weight, this anxiety, it doesn't discriminate. It visits the young mother juggling too many responsibilities, the retiree wondering about purpose, the student facing an uncertain future. It whispers the same doubts, the same fears, the same endless what-ifs that can turn a peaceful evening into a restless night. But what if I told you that this very anxiety, this thing that feels like your burden, could become your teacher? What if the Buddhist path offers not just relief but transformation, a way to alchemize worry into wisdom, fear into freedom? Today we'll walk together through an ancient understanding that has guided countless souls through their darkest hours. This isn't about quick fixes or pretending everything is fine. This is about meeting your anxiety with the fierce compassion of the Buddha's teachings and discovering that within your very suffering lies the seed of your liberation. The Buddha's first noble truth, often referred to as dukkha, is a central tenet in Buddhist teachings. In its simplest form, dukkha translates to suffering or unsatisfactoriness. However, its meaning is far broader and more nuanced, capturing not only the pain of life, but also the inherent discomfort and anxiety that arise from the constant flux of existence. The Buddha observed that suffering is an unavoidable part of the human condition. It manifests in many forms: physical pain, emotional distress, mental turmoil, and existential dissatisfaction. But perhaps one of the most prevalent and pervasive forms of suffering is anxiety. In modern life, anxiety often carries a stigma, as if it's a personal flaw or failure. People may feel ashamed or isolated when they experience anxiety, believing that they are somehow broken or different from others. This sense of shame can deepen the suffering, creating a vicious cycle that makes anxiety even more intense. However, the Buddha's teaching of dukkha invites us to see things differently. Rather than viewing anxiety as an anomaly, the first noble truth teaches us to accept it as an integral part of being human. The very fact that we are alive means we will encounter various forms of discomfort and unease. The human experience is inherently impermanent and uncertain, and this is where anxiety often arises, from our attachment to stability, control, and predictability in a world that is ever-changing. Anxiety, then, is not a reflection of personal inadequacy, but a natural response to the unpredictability and impermanence of life. Recognizing anxiety as a universal human experience, rather than something that is unique to us, can be profoundly liberating. It allows us to stop fighting against it, to stop seeing ourselves as flawed or abnormal for feeling anxious, and instead embrace it with compassion and understanding. When we come to terms with the fact that suffering, including anxiety, is a shared aspect of human existence, we can begin to release the additional layer of suffering that comes from believing that something is fundamentally wrong with us. This shift in perspective doesn't mean that anxiety will vanish overnight, but it does create space for us to meet it with acceptance rather than resistance. We can begin to explore healthy ways of responding to it, whether through mindfulness, meditation, or other methods of cultivating inner peace. By embracing the first noble truth, we can transcend the feeling of being alone in our suffering. Instead, we begin to see our anxiety as part of the larger human story, a shared experience that connects us to others. Understanding dukkha in this way opens the door to healing, not by eliminating anxiety, but by shifting our relationship to it. Through this understanding, we can find a path forward that is not defined by the avoidance of discomfort, but by a compassionate embrace of life's inherent challenges. Mindfulness technique, recognition practice. In moments of anxiety, we are often caught in a storm of thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. Our instinct may be to avoid or suppress the discomfort, to fight against it, or to try to change it as quickly as possible. Yet mindfulness offers us a powerful tool to meet anxiety with compassion and awareness, rather than resistance. One such practice is the RAIN approach, a four-step method for acknowledging, processing, and ultimately transforming our experience with anxiety. The RAIN approach for anxiety. Recognize. The first step is to recognize that anxiety has arrived. This may sound simple, but it's the foundation of the practice. Often we become so entangled in our anxious thoughts and emotions that we lose the ability to simply observe them. Instead, we are swept up in the narrative. Recognizing anxiety as it arises allows us to create a moment of awareness, creating space between ourselves and the emotion. Rather than identifying with the anxiety, we acknowledge it as something separate from our true self. The act of noticing without judgment or the immediate impulse to fix it is profound. Simply say to yourself, anxiety is here. Allow. Once we've recognized that anxiety is present, the next step is to allow it to be there without trying to change it or push it away. This may be the most difficult step, as it goes against our natural instinct to avoid discomfort. However, giving permission for the feeling to exist means that we're no longer fighting against it, which paradoxically allows us to let go of the additional stress that comes from the internal struggle. We don't need to like the feeling or agree with it, but we allow it to be a valid part of the moment. I allow this anxiety to be here just as it is. Investigate. After recognizing and allowing the anxiety, the next step is to investigate it with gentle curiosity. This means observing the experience in a non-judgmental way, as though you are a scientist studying the phenomenon of anxiety. How does it feel in your body? What physical sensations arise with the anxiety? Tightness in the chest, tension in the shoulders, a racing heart. What thoughts accompany the anxiety? What stories does the mind tell? By bringing awareness to the experience in this way, we begin to disentangle ourselves from the emotional charge. We start to see anxiety not as a threat, but as a process unfolding in our body and mind. This act of observation can help us recognize patterns or triggers that we may not have noticed before. What is this anxiety telling me? Where is it coming from? Non-identification. The final step is to practice non-identification. This means remembering that you are not the anxiety. You are the awareness observing it. Anxiety is something that happens, not something that defines you. The key here is to avoid merging with the feeling or believing that it defines who you are. You are the conscious observer, the space in which anxiety arises and dissipates. By detaching from the anxiety in this way, we reclaim our sense of agency and inner peace. The anxiety may come and go, but it does not need to determine our sense of self. I am the awareness observing this anxiety, not the anxiety itself. Daily practice, one of the most effective ways to integrate this mindfulness technique into your life, is to make it a part of your daily routine. When anxiety arises, pause for a moment and silently repeat the following affirmation. Anxiety is here. This is a normal human experience. I'm not alone in feeling this way. This simple acknowledgement can transform the experience of anxiety from a personal crisis into a shared human condition. When we recognize that anxiety is not something unique to us, but a common thread in the fabric of human existence, we can release the additional suffering that arises from feeling isolated or flawed. We begin to see that we are not alone in our struggles, and that our anxiety is a part of what makes us human. Over time, as you practice RAIN, you may begin to notice that anxiety no longer feels as overwhelming or consuming. By observing it with kindness and curiosity, rather than judgment or resistance, the anxiety loses its grip on your sense of self. It becomes just another passing experience in the flow of life, and in this spacious awareness, you may discover a deeper sense of peace, grounded in the understanding that anxiety is not something to be feared or rejected, but something to be acknowledged and accepted. If this message resonates with you, and you're seeking more moments of peace and insight, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for daily reflections rooted in ancient wisdom and modern clarity. The wisdom of normalization. By recognizing anxiety as dukkha, the unavoidable friction of conscious existence, we stop wasting energy fighting reality and begin working skillfully with what is present. This shift from resistance to acceptance is the first step toward freedom. Chapter 2. Understanding Craving and Aversion, the Roots of Restlessness. The Buddha's second noble truth points directly to the roots of suffering, tanha, often translated as craving or thirst. This is the mind's unrelenting impulse to grasp after what it wants and push away what it fears. It is the constant whisper, if only things were different, then I could be at peace. When it comes to anxiety, these forces of craving and aversion are always at work beneath the surface. craving appears as the longing for certainty, safety, and control, the desperate wish that everything will turn out a certain way. Aversion shows up as resistance to what is, wishing the present moment or our inner state would disappear or change. This dynamic creates an inner tug-of-war, pulling us away from the groundedness of the present and into a restless cycle of worry. Anxiety grows stronger the more we struggle against it, because we are reinforcing the mind's belief that we must fix the situation before we can rest. Core insight. The grasping mind, anxiety thrives not simply because life is uncertain, but because of the way we relate to that uncertainty. The mind believes it can think its way to safety by anticipating every possible outcome and preparing for each one. It reaches endlessly into the future, arranging and rearranging hypothetical scenarios, as though by sheer mental effort it could guarantee a good result. But the truth is, no amount of mental rehearsal can remove the fact that the future is unknown. What causes us to suffer is not uncertainty itself, but our resistance to it. Like a person clenching their fist around sand, the tighter we try to hold on to control, the more exhausted and anxious we become. When we see the grasping mind clearly, we can begin to soften its grip. We start to ask, what if peace is not found in controlling outcomes, but in learning to trust ourselves to meet whatever arises? Mindfulness technique, the monkey trap meditation. In parts of Asia, hunters once used a simple trap to catch monkeys, a hollowed-out coconut filled with sweet fruit. The hole was just wide enough for the monkey to slip its hand inside, but too small to pull its clenched fist back out. The monkey could go free at any moment by releasing the fruit, but its craving kept it trapped. Anxiety works the same way. We hold on tightly to our desire to control, not realizing that this very grasping is what keeps us imprisoned. Practice. Sit quietly and bring your awareness to your breath for several minutes. When anxiety arises, pause and gently investigate. What am I trying to grasp or control right now? What am I pushing away or resisting? Where do I feel this grasping in my body? Notice the tension, perhaps in the chest, shoulders, jaw, or gut. Then silently ask, what would happen if I opened my hand and released this need to control? Imagine the fist unclenching, the grip loosening. Visualize yourself stepping out of the trap, not by forcing change, but by letting go. The practice of curious inquiry. When anxiety appears, we often leap immediately into problem-solving mode, trying to eliminate the feeling as quickly as possible. But this can deepen the cycle of grasping. Instead, try approaching anxiety with curiosity, as though it were a messenger bearing valuable information. Ask yourself, what does this anxiety want me to know? What care, love, or value is hidden underneath this worry? How might this anxiety be trying to protect me or someone I care about? This inquiry shifts our posture from fixing to listening. We begin to see that anxiety is not always an enemy to be conquered. Sometimes it is love expressing itself through concern. The very presence of anxiety can point to what we hold most dear. Wisdom insight. From problem-solving to presence. When we stop treating anxiety as a mechanical malfunction to be repaired and start experiencing it as an inner signal about what matters most, our entire relationship with it transforms. Anxiety becomes less of a crisis and more of a compass. Yes, it may still feel uncomfortable, but now we can meet it with tenderness rather than judgment. It becomes a teacher, revealing our deepest attachments, our love for family, our desire for stability, our hopes for a meaningful future. By practicing mindfulness in this way, we gradually learn to rest in presence, even while anxiety is here. This does not mean we stop caring about outcomes, but we stop believing that our peace depends on controlling them. We learn to live with open hands, responding skillfully to life as it unfolds, rather than trying to force it into our preferred shape. Chapter 3. The Middle Way. Finding Balance with Anxiety. The Buddha's teachings on the middle way encourage us to navigate life's challenges with balance and wisdom, avoiding the extremes of excess or deficiency. When it comes to anxiety, we often find ourselves caught in one of two extremes. Either we react with force, trying to aggressively control or eliminate our anxiety, or we withdraw, avoiding or denying it completely. The middle way offers a third path, one that involves mindful engagement, without clinging to fixed outcomes. This approach allows us to respond to anxiety with equanimity, rather than being swept away by it. Core insight, beyond fighting and fleeing. The human response to anxiety is often driven by the natural fight or flight mechanisms. In the face of discomfort, we either fight. We engage in aggressive strategies trying to control the situation through rigid thinking, constant planning, or forced positivity. Flee? We avoid the anxiety altogether, engaging in procrastination, denial, or numbing behaviors such as distraction or substance use. Both of these responses are rooted in attachment, the desire to avoid discomfort or the fear of facing the unknown. These approaches can lead to even more suffering, as the cycle of either resistance or avoidance often exacerbates the very anxiety we seek to escape. The middle way, however, invites us to break free from this binary. Rather than fighting or fleeing, we cultivate a third response, mindful engagement. This means being present with anxiety as it arises, without being swept away by its force or allowing it to control us. We learn to ride the wave of anxiety, not by resisting it or giving in to it, but by observing and responding with awareness and balance. Mindfulness technique. The surfer's balance. One of the most helpful metaphors for finding balance with anxiety is that of a surfer riding a wave. The surfer doesn't fight the wave, nor does she collapse under its force. Instead, she engages with it dynamically, adjusting her movements to stay in flow, maintaining her center. Practice. Visualize yourself as a surfer on a wave of anxious energy. Feel the wave building beneath you, rising higher as your anxiety grows. Notice the natural tendency to either fight the wave, through tension, overthinking or compulsively trying to control the situation, or to collapse into it. Allowing yourself to be swept away by the overwhelming emotions. Find the balance point. As the wave crests, see if you can find a space where you don't either fight it or give in to it. This is where you remain steady, acknowledging the wave's power without letting it control you. You ride the wave not by controlling it, but by responding skillfully to its motion. Breathe with the wave. As the wave moves, so do you, gently shifting your weight to stay upright, adjusting to the changes in the wave's energy. With each breath, relax into the rhythm of the movement, staying connected to your center. This constant adjustment represents the mindful engagement we need with anxiety, responding to it, but not being controlled by it. Daily balance practices. The middle way is not just a philosophy, it is a practical approach to living with balance in our everyday lives. Below are some simple yet powerful practices to help you find that middle ground when anxiety arises. Neither overplanning nor underpreparing. Make reasonable preparations for future events. It's natural to want to prepare for the future, especially when anxiety is present. However, it's important not to get trapped in endless planning that doesn't lead to any real action. Set a time limit for planning sessions. Instead of spiraling into overthinking, set a time limit for planning, e.g. 20 to 30 minutes. Once the time is up, step away from the plans and allow yourself to trust that you've done enough for now. Accept uncertainty. Acknowledge that you can't control all outcomes, and that uncertainty is an inevitable part of life. This acceptance can reduce the urge to cling to control, allowing you to let go of perfectionism and take life as it comes. Neither catastrophizing nor minimizing. Acknowledge real concerns without spinning worst-case scenarios. Anxiety often leads us to imagine the worst possible outcomes. While it's essential to take legitimate concerns seriously, it's equally important not to catastrophize. Ask yourself, is this the worst-case scenario, or am I projecting my anxiety onto the situation? Take appropriate action. Once you acknowledge the concern, take practical steps, but avoid the impulse to create drama or elevate the situation into an emergency. Acknowledge your feelings, but keep them in perspective and avoid reacting impulsively. Validate your feelings. Rather than suppressing or minimizing your feelings of anxiety, simply acknowledge them. Yes, I am anxious, and that is okay. By validating your experience, you can release some of the intensity without adding judgment or criticism. Neither fighting nor fleeing. When anxiety arrives, greet it with interested attention. Instead of automatically reacting with resistance or avoidance, take a moment to simply notice the anxiety. What does it feel like in my body? What thoughts are accompanying it? Approach it as you would an unexpected guest, with curiosity, not fear. Avoid both the urge to escape and the compulsion to analyze endlessly. Fighting anxiety may involve mental analysis and excessive thinking. Fleeing it can look like avoiding the situation altogether. Practice meeting your anxiety with a calm, open awareness. You do not need to immediately solve or eliminate it. Instead, sit with it and allow it to be what it is. Practice simply being present with whatever arises. The act of being present with your anxiety can feel uncomfortable at first, but it is through this presence that we begin to release its hold over us. By staying with the feeling without fighting it or fleeing from it, we create the space for transformation. The wisdom of steady presence. The middle way teaches that most situations call for steady, consistent presence rather than dramatic action. Whether we're facing a difficult conversation, a challenging work task, or personal uncertainty, the key is to approach each moment with calm awareness rather than seeking extreme solutions. By cultivating steady presence, we develop resilience, the ability to stay grounded and balanced even when life feels unpredictable. This approach helps us avoid the exhausting cycle of emotional highs and lows that often accompany anxiety. Instead of reacting impulsively, we develop the wisdom to respond mindfully, leading to a more peaceful and balanced life. Through consistent practice of the middle way, we build emotional muscle, the ability to stand firm without rigidity, to adapt without collapsing. This balanced approach enables us to meet anxiety with confidence and grace, not as a foe to fight or a threat to flee from, but as a natural part of the human experience. Final reflection. Buddhist teachings on anxiety point toward a fundamental truth. We are far more resilient, wise, and loving than our anxious thoughts would have us believe. Beneath the worried mind lies an unshakable awareness that has weathered every storm and remained intact. Your anxiety is not evidence of your brokenness. It is proof of your deep caring, your engagement with life, your refusal to remain unconscious in an uncertain world. When approached with wisdom rather than resistance, anxiety becomes a doorway to greater authenticity, deeper compassion, and more skillful living. The path continues with each breath, each moment of choice between reactivity and response, each opportunity to meet difficulty with an open heart. Trust in your innate wisdom. Trust in your capacity for growth. Trust that this very uncertainty you're learning to navigate is the ground from which true freedom grows. May your practice bring benefit to yourself and all beings. May you find peace not through the absence of challenge, but through the presence of wisdom. May you discover that the very heart you thought was broken by anxiety is actually vast enough to hold everything with love.